I'm going to kind of turn it over to Linda to talk about the current issue that's kind of on everybody's mind with the system development charge. And so, Linda, you want to take that with
Okay.
take that?
Mike, I know you've been following this very closely, and the proposed system development charge that arose from the Bowen-Collins master plan revision that they did called for raising the essentially a hookup fee for a home by about $4,000. And this was done because they looked at what money they were taking in, what they projected as their expenses, etc. What is your take on the system development charge as it stands, and what needs to be done to pay for future infrastructure for the district?
Okay. My basic assumption on all of this, as I've tried to make clear, is that we do not know as a matter of scientific fact how much water we actually have in the basin. Let's start with that. Therefore, to simply go around and say the population is going to grow, I think they say in that study 3.3%. My calculation is 3.2, but it doesn't matter. They just linearly project out for the next 10 years that we're going to have a population projection of 3.3%. You know, linear is just going to grow at 3%. And then they take that, and as you probably know, that they assign these EDUs to populations as a percents and all that kind of stuff. So the EDU is directly associated with these population projections. And then they assume that there's water there. And they assume that there's water there to meet these population demands. Therefore, we have to issue these EDUs, and we have to build infrastructure and everything else to be able to deliver this water we're assuming we're going to have to pump. So all of that's based on assumptions. Now, again, I want to make this absolutely clear. You can't start, it's improper to sit there and study water and say, well, water just pops up out of the ground because the population's growing. You start with how much water is actually there. Okay, but let's set aside, you asked me about the EDUs themselves. These are linear projections. You add up a percent of the costs, the current infrastructure costs, and a percent of what you think the future cost is going to be to deliver this artificial water that we think is going to be there. And then you divide it by these EDUs and you come up with this 6,000 number. The problem with a linear projection like that is, and Ballwig addressed this on Wednesday. He said, hey, they don't take into consideration, Ballwig's paraphrasing here, he said they don't take into consideration these fluctuations. And they don't. What if the population only grows 1%? And yet we spent, what do they say, 40 million? But it only grows 1%. Then that means the water board's made a profit. Now let's say that it grows 10%. That means that the cost in excess of the 3% that they're projecting has to be borne by the culinary water users. So I always have problems with studies that are linear like that. I have a problem with a study that begins with assumptions about populations and assumptions about water. Again, I will state this again and again, we need to know how much water we have, and then you plan around that.
So are you saying that we should not issue any more EDU permits, equivalent dwelling unit permits, for any more construction until a basin study is done? Is that what you're saying?
I actually wrote an article on that some time ago.
Well, just answer the question if you would, please.
That would be my recommendation.
So you would stop
So-
all building, all growth
Yeah.
until a basin study
Yes,
is
because
done?
here's the problem. Here's the problem I'm trying to get people to understand. If you don't, this economy depends on, not on how many houses you build, not on how many truck stops you build. This economy depends on how much water you have, period. And there is a question about how much water we have. There is a question about how much water is available across the West. In Nevada, by state policy, they've said you gotta study this stuff conjunctively. And then the state water engineer will issue how much water you have. So if we grow, as is highly possible, based upon the perennial yield primarily, if we are in fact taking more water out of that basin, and if in fact we're ignoring that, and if in fact we think that houses are more important than water, that's the wrong way to go. And my entire campaign is really based upon that. Now, is it up to me? No. But it's up to the city council. The city council can say, hey, I think we need to do this study. And until we do, we're not going to issue any more permits. Now, they haven't said that. And I don't expect they will. You got too many darn real estate agents on there.
Well, by
But-
the way,
Okay, well,
the
go
water
ahead.
district itself placed a temporary moratorium on building that only lasted, what,
What a
a week?
week, yeah.
By popular demand, it was.
Well, the demand of 2 or 3 construction companies, I don't know how
Well-
popular that was.
Yes, it was temporary in that it would only last until the board had a chance to legally consider raising the fee. Now, I know you go back to the idea that we don't even know if there is water to pump out of the ground. But if we don't have the finances to put in the infrastructure for those projected homes in the next 2 or 3 years until we have a water study done in 2023.
Well, I don't think it should be done in 2023. I think it should be done tomorrow. So I'm not accepting the 2023 issue.
Okay, but then it sounds like your solution would be to do a moratorium and forget about the system development charge because we shouldn't be building more houses anyway. Is that what you're saying?
I am saying that the elected political officials, the city council primarily, and the water board, I do think that we are in fact in danger of overbuilding. Now, it's up to the majority of the city council and the water board to decide if they want to continue to build, not knowing how much water we actually have. I'm just one voice.
Well, but it sounds like your first moves, if you're elected, would be, number one, to call for a basin study.
That's correct.
And at the same time, a moratorium on all building.
If I were God and I controlled the city council and I controlled, they have a vote in all of this. I don't want to even assume. My vote would be yes. It is so dangerous, and I don't know how you're going to print this, you probably edit all this, but it is so dangerous to continue building without knowing how much water we have, that we have to take that situation seriously. Mm-hmm. And a moratorium. Now, one of the things I learned from Brown the other day, apparently what Boulder City does that. They only issue certain amounts of EDUs.
Oh, they've done that for years.
Well, I presume and I don't know why they're doing that, but I presume they're doing it because they know what the limits are.
Well, I think they don't have any water permits.
Well, whatever the reason.
Yeah.
Whatever the reason. Okay.
Okay, so
One other point. Go ahead. No, go
I
ahead.
was going to ask you a question about the role that conservation would play in this.
Yes.
Las Vegas itself is using, I think, less water now than it did a number of years ago because
And so are we.
and we are too because of conservation measures. So, how would that play into your?
Oh, I think it's very important. It obviously is very important. One of the reasons we're using less water, of course, is because the Water Board has done some fantastic work in terms of controlling losses out of the water. I mean, there's been a lot of work that's done. My issues are policy issues. Please understand that I think that the employees of the Water Board and others are great people. My issue is strictly a policy issue on balancing growth with water, supply and demand. Demand in growth in housing versus supply. You know, the primary, especially in public policy, you want to have those two things in equilibrium. If one of them gets out of balance, you're in trouble.
Okay, we're gonna cut it there.
Are we done?